Hello, welcome to In the Kitchen with Brett Thorne, a food service industry podcast by Restaurant Hospitality. I'm your host, Senior Food and Beverage Editor Brett Thorne, and I'm really excited about this episode because I'm speaking with Bin Liu, the executive chef of the restaurant at Blue Rock in Washington, Virginia. And we talk about a wide range of topics, but we really get into cooking and technique, which is something that even though this podcast is called In the Kitchen, we don't always address. Sometimes we talk about running restaurants or the food service industry or whatever it is. But in this case, we really dig into some techniques that Bin Liu is working on and some different approaches he has to flavor. This is really my wheelhouse. I like talking about techniques, even though I went to culinary school and I've been interviewing chefs for a couple of decades, so I know a lot about technique, but when I cook, I actually don't, it's not very technique-y. My basic meal, I take a quart takeout container and fill it with vegetables. Always onions, sometimes bell peppers, zucchini, usually some chili, and then whatever other vegetable. Could be eggplant, could be carrots, could be cabbage. Not too much cabbage because that tends to overwhelm everything. Toss in some garlic, and I just sort of cook that in a cast iron skillet in olive oil. And then I add some kind of protein, maybe ground beef and pork, maybe eggs. Sometimes I start with some other aromatics like ginger and turmeric, fresh ginger. And, I go from there. And it's always delicious because I also put in salt. You gotta put in salt. But it's about straightforward flavors and something that doesn't require a lot of skill. Anybody could do it. And that's really what a lot of my cooking is these days. Bin Liu, on the other hand, has some very interesting approaches to bringing out the best flavor in food, and he's experimenting, moving away from some of the traditional approaches to, say, making a soup. And certainly he combines flavors and ingredients from many different culinary traditions. He himself was born in Shanghai, China, but he moved to the United States when he was 2 or 3 years old, and he's a self-taught chef. Well, he says not self-taught because how are you going to teach yourself? Anytime you work in a kitchen, you learn from everybody there, and that's what he has done. And he has an interesting background, having worked in DC at CityZen and Pineapple and Pearls, before joining the restaurant at Blue Rock. And now I'm going to let you hear from him because he's an interesting guy who I like a lot. Here is Bin Liu. Bin Liu, tell me about you and your restaurant. You are the chef of the restaurant at Blue Rock in Washington, Virginia, right?
Yep, that's correct.
So tell me about this restaurant.
So some of the basics, we're a 32-seat restaurant, 5-room inn. We also have a guest home that's available for kind of rental as a single unit. And then our property itself is in Rappahannock County, which is it's about 2 hours west of Washington, D.C. Really gorgeous part of Virginia that's really rural. So like our property itself is actually sitting on 80 acres of land. Right next to the actual main building of the inn, we have a koi pond. Past that, a small set of vineyards that belong to us as well. We have a guy that runs stables that has horses that he'll teach lessons along with a polo ring. So there's a lot of it's a very quaint kind of countryside sort of setting.
Sounds great. Well, Washington, Virginia is quite a culinary hotbed, actually. The Inn at Little Washington is there too, right?
Yeah, exactly. So the Inn at Little Washington is one of our neighbors as well. We're about 2 miles east of a little town called Sperryville. So there you've got some really great food operations like Three Blacksmiths, Sumac, and then the Penn Druid Brewery as well.
That's cool. And what is the food like at your restaurant?
So our restaurant, we have two food outlets. We have a kind of a bar slash pub that we call the tasting room. So there you get more casual items like a burger, fried chicken, cheese plate, charcuterie. That's also connected to a really large patio that seats about 60 with lawn pods. So that's kind of great for if you just wanted to stop by, get a glass of wine, and kind of just relax and sit outside and enjoy the nice weather. At the same time, for our 32-seat dining room, we do a four-course menu with choices. So it's what you'd call a prix-fixe. Some people call it a tasting menu. Essentially, it's kind of like you can sit down for a nice meal, but you get to choose. You're not kind of strapped into to kind of what the tasting means for the day or the week or what have you.
I see. And how long have you been there?
So we opened in October of not last year, but the year before. And I've been working on the project since December of 2020.
So quite a while.
A little bit, yeah.
And before that, you were at Pineapple and Pearls, right?
I was Pineapple Pros in DC.
Right, and that I think is the first place that I saw where where the chefs were using like old cattle, like former dairy cows. Was that Pineapple and Pearls, or am I thinking of someplace else?
We were using dairy cow in one of our earliest menus, but we weren't the originators for that. There's a couple really great chefs that were kind of, I think, doing the pioneering work on figuring that sort of stuff out before us.
Yeah, but it's a cool concept. It's like eating cattle, eating beef in a really different way. I mean, I think I only ate old cow once, and it was super beefy, but kind of gamey, which I thought was really fun.
Yeah, it actually has, a lot of people don't realize it actually has a really big historical precedent. So in Europe, in places where, most people don't have access to like a big cattle source the way we do in America.
Mm-hmm.
And so more often than not, they had dual use breeds. And so the breeds of the cat, like we have meat breeds for cows, and then we also have dairy breeds for cows that specialize in one or the other. But in Europe, a lot of the quote unquote old country, you have cows they were bred to produce milk, and so while they're alive, they could help sustain the farm and kind of provide products that way. And then once they weren't able to produce milk anymore, their natural genetic makeup was such that the beef was actually really delicious too once they got to that age.
Because they didn't separate them out as dairy cattle and beef cattle; they were just cattle.
They didn't have enough room. They needed cattle that could do both, basically.
Right. That makes sense. And obviously it was much smaller operations than most of what we have now.
Exactly. I mean, it's kind of how you had to do it in the old, so to speak.
And how about your food at Blue Rock? We've actually featured it a couple of times recently. Your shaved tete de moine cheese rosette with black truffles, and your so-called mac and cheese, which was also had black truffles, right?
It did. Yeah, that was a little, so like the tete de moine, that was kind of a special. We were getting really great Perigors for a while. The season ends more or less in February, so we're getting a lot of really great truffles that we just kind of wanted to feature on their own. And then the mac and cheese was kind of they're kind of like more slipped in there, so to speak.
And that's sort of a tube pasta filled with cheese and truffles, right?
Yeah. So kind of, looking at on that, it was kind of looking at, okay, how do we, with the menu, I always want items that guests can really relate to, whether that's because it's, unfamiliar ingredients put together in a really familiar format, or an idea that's really familiar and relatable to people, but done in something, an interesting new way, what have you. So for that, mac and cheese, traditionally it's like an elbow noodle or like a baked casserole, something like that. What we did for that one is we actually take ziti pasta. I actually found it on Amazon, but it's like a foot long ziti pasta. And we actually blanch the whole thing and cut it, and then we fill each noodle with a mixture of celery root, black truffle, kind of stack all of that together, and then give it like this really delicious and light cheese mousse that goes on top. So it doesn't quite look like mac and cheese, but I think when you eat it, you start to get those references, kind of see how everything comes together.
Sounds great. And so how did you get your job at Blue Rock?
So that was a little bit of little bit of serendipity, and just kind of being in the right place at the right time. So I had left Pineapple and Pearls in the fall of 2020, and I was just kind of figuring out, okay, what do I want to do next? Where do I want to go? I had a couple opportunities pop up around the country, a couple that are international, and I had a friend who he works on the front of the house side of things, and so he was doing a wine tasting with someone with like a wine distributor, and the guy mentioned offhand, "Oh, hey, I heard there's a big property, like a big inn property undergoing renovations out in Virginia." My friend mentioned it to me. I asked him to kind of dig up the name, and I actually looked up the name, and I found the old. So Blue Rock had been operating previously as a restaurant. So I found the old website, and there was like a info@bluerock.com, and I just shot them a cold email, introduced myself, and then it all went from there.
Wow, that's amazing. Especially since like I try to contact restaurants a lot for various different reasons, and the contact us almost never works. Like
Yeah,
usually like they've forgotten about it, they don't know that it exists.
yeah. I
So
had no idea if I was going to get a response. I just kind of shot out the email and just was like, "Oh, let's see what happens."
and this was pretty much at the height of the pandemic in fall of 2020,
Yeah,
right?
pretty much. Like I think things were getting a little bit better. Some places had started reopening, but it was still things are still very uncertain back then for sure.
And what were you doing before Pineapple and Pearls?
So most so basically before Pineapple and Pros, I was working at a restaurant in DC called CityZen.
Mhm.
It was under
With Eric Ziebold, right?
Eric Ziebold, yep, in the Mandarin. And then I ended up with a little bit of a gap. So after CityZen closed, I had actually started talking to the people at Pineapple and Pros and actually signed on with the project. But there was a gap of about, I think, like 8 months or so before there's going to be any real work. So immediately before Pineapple Pros, I was actually on the opening team for the Manresa Bakery out in California.
Oh, so you were getting around.
Yeah, I mean, just kind of looking for, it was a little window of time, and it was an opportunity to kind of gain experience in a field that I didn't know too much about.
Well, not knowing too much about stuff, this sounds rude, but that's kind of your expertise because you're a self-taught chef, right? Like you didn't go to culinary school or anything, right?
Yeah, so I didn't, that's one of those phrases that I think is always tough, because I didn't go to culinary school, but at the same time, I think anyone that works in the industry can tell you, like you learn from everyone that you work around, right? So you may not get formal training, but you basically get your training from on the job. You get your training from just the people you work with, work for, etc.
It's true. You can't be self-taught. You got to learn from someplace. Although,
Exactly. Yep. Yep.
although you, how did you start getting interested in cooking in the first place?
So that was something that kind of really came around in college. So I went to the University of Virginia down in Charlottesville, Virginia. And so I wanted to figure out just how do I get better food. The food in the cafeteria is not that great. And it's like not the cheapest thing in the world. So I kind of figured at one point, you know what, maybe I should try just cooking for myself. Like it should taste better. I can get better food. And I figured out right off the bat that I kind of had no idea what I was doing. Couldn't make a single thing. So I started just doing my research and trying to, figure out, okay, how does food work? How does taking something from like raw to cook work? And so this was back before Food Network was even a thing, if you remember, back when it was like maybe a couple hours on like Lifetime or something like that. I think for TV shows there was like Two Fat Ladies. That was probably about it.
I love that.
Um, it was a great show,
Yeah.
honestly. So I was finding cookbooks, finding, the blogging scene was kind of just getting around. So just finding whatever resource I could. And so by the time I got to my third year of college, when everyone's kind of thinking about, do I do internships, do I go to grad school, et cetera, and I kind of realized I'd spent more time kind of thinking and learning about cooking than really paying attention to any of my classes. And you're 21, 22. So it's like, if there's ever a time to do something that is like pretty risky and doesn't have a lot of payoff, like it's probably when you're young.
And so then you just started working in restaurants.
Yeah. So I finished up, got my degree, and then just started working in restaurants from there.
So you look like you're about 24, but you are not. You are in your 40s, according to my math.
I'm not quite 40 yet. I'm getting there
Okay.
though. Yeah.
Uh, so that's Cool. What were some of the first things you like needed to figure out how to cook? Like sandwiches? What were you trying to do
Do you mean on my own or in a restaurant?
on your own when you were like, I don't know how to cook. How do I learn how to do
Was
it?
I remember one of the first things I tried to make where I was like, this is really failing, was I tried to roast a chicken. Um,
Well, that's
and so,
hard.
well, it's when you don't really understand. I didn't really understand using a thermometer or anything like that. So I kind of chicken goes in the oven, color looks good. I take it out. Skin's cooked. Get through that first layer of the breast. That's fine. Second layer of the breast. Wow, that's pretty raw. Goes back in the oven. Pull it out. Okay, that part's cooked. Okay, it's still raw, like deeper in. So it took a while. Took a while.
And now you are an executive chef, so that's pretty cool.
Now I can roast a chicken.
You, that's good. Good
Yeah,
job.
yeah, it's
Which,
progress.
as I said, is hard. Like it's both basic and difficult. Like if you can make a good roast chicken,
No,
then
no, that's very true.
yeah, people say that sort of defines you as a chef if you can roast a chicken or make an omelet. It kind of depends.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
Although you're originally from China, right? Where they roast chicken, but that's probably not the defining characteristic of a good Chinese chef.
Yeah. So I was born in China. I moved to the States when I was about two or three.
Oh, so you don't have a lot of memories of China when you were two or
I
three.
don't. My whole extended family's back there, and I've been back a few times.
What part are you from?
Shanghai.
Good city. I studied in China for my junior year of college. I was in
Oh, no kidding.
Nanjing for one semester, so not far from Shanghai and then Beijing.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. What was it like back then?
Insane. I think my IQ actually
Same
went
now.
up from being in China just because everything's different. Like how
Yeah.
you count to 10 on your fingers is different.
Sure.
Everything.
Yeah.
And so uh, it was total sensory overload,
Hmm.
but gave me great perspective. And I think it's good to be a minority someplace so that you understand what it's like to be a minority. And then, and yeah, I came back smarter and more aware of everything around me. And anyone listening, go abroad for a while. It's good for you.
Yeah. No, I think everyone should travel, regardless of your age. Like, travel, go somewhere where you can get around, go somewhere you can't get around. I think it's really important for all of us.
I remember when we were in Nanjing, we were traveling somewhere. We traveled all the time on weekends, and it was really hard because China's a big, crowded country and highly bureaucratic, and at the time, not super efficient. So, you had to stand in line for several hours to get a train ticket, for example, from Nanjing to Shanghai. And I remember we were going somewhere, we met this one giant American guy, like he was like 6'6".
Hmm.
He didn't speak any Chinese, and he was just sort of like working his way around and doing stuff and traveling. And
Was
we
he
were
your
very worried for him. Like we don't know how he did it because we were all students of Chinese, so like we could function. So we just like wrote down in Chinese the names of places for him to go when he was somewhere, so he could
Sure.
show it to
Yeah.
people.
Yeah. No, I mean that's a tricky thing for sure, and especially back then. Every when I have gone back, like every time, even though it's the same city, I barely recognize it because it changes so much so fast. So even back then, I can't imagine what the infrastructure was like as far as like getting around.
It was challenging,
Yeah,
but
for sure.
that was part of the fun.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Because for us, we were students. It wasn't life and death. We'd figure it out. It would be okay.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, it was a really fascinating year. But let's get back to you and the restaurant at Blue Rock. Tell me more about what kind of dishes you serve. And as you said, it's a prix-fixe thing. It's like $119 prix-fixe. Is that right?
Yeah, so it's $119 with four courses, and then each course, so first, second, and fourth course have choices. The first course is kind of like our appetizer. Second course, we do like a pasta, starch, that sort of dish. Third course is our main entree, and then fourth course dessert. Um,
Pretty
and so
standard.
basically, yeah, exactly. So the idea is kind of like you can come in, you can choose. So if you're feeling in a certain mood, want to try this thing but not that thing, like you're free to do that. But then at the same time, you're going to get kind of a full meal. You know what I mean? Um, And then so as far as how the menu's designed, we change the menu pretty frequently. I try to have one dish component element change basically on a week to week basis. The idea there, it's a few different things kind of in play there. One is we are so remote. We have a lot of great farms around here, but they don't, they're not big operations. So it's not like they're making the same thing year round. Their products can change week to week. Like sometimes they have a frost overnight, something dies, an animal gets in, it's all gone. Or like we have a heat spell, so everything suddenly starts shooting up. And I want to make sure that we can respond to that, and so when we get those notices from the farms, then we say, okay, we got to figure this out. At the same time, you know, with the style of the menu, I don't want it to be the sort of place where it's like a tasting menu that changes like 4 times a year. So you come in once, you're like, okay, I don't, there's no point coming back for a while.
Right.
I want people to be able to feel like they can come back very often. Because I just want it to be, you can come in for a birthday anniversary, but I just want it to also be a place you can come for just a nice meal. And so I feel like, if the menu's changing and you feel like, and you can come back as often as you want and still try different things, I think it's a better value for guests that way.
And they can be more frequent guests.
Exactly. Yeah. And like some people want to come back and eat the same thing every time, but I think a lot of people don't. They want to try new things. They want to, they want to have a different meal. And so I want to make sure we can offer that.
And do you have a lot of regulars?
Yeah, we actually have a very solid local regular clientele, which I always find pretty flattering, just because where we live, or where the restaurant is, it's not very populated. I mean, there's just not a lot of people around here. So to have people come back more than once, more than twice, more than 5 times, I think is a huge compliment for us. I think for any restaurant business, it's easy enough to get people to come in to try it once, but to get them to come back, that's when you kind of know that you're doing something right.
And they can drive not too far and go to the Inn at Little Washington if they want. So they have other options than
Right.
you. So that's flattering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's huge for us.
And so this is your first executive chef job, right?
Not quite. So I was when I started at Pineapple Pros, I was a sous chef, and then by the time I left, I was the head chef there.
Oh, okay. Well, nice going.
Yeah, thank you.
So, and how is your menu different at the inn at Blue Rock, or sorry, the restaurant at Blue Rock compared to Pineapple and Pros? Probably quite different. Different city, different setting.
Yeah, it's very different. So Pineapple and Pearls it was a tasting menu. Is a single. There are no choices. You came in and the menu ranged from 9 courses to 15 courses, depending on kind of what we're doing. And it was a very kind of formal, showy, a lot of like tableside presentations, things like that. Whereas the food at the restaurant at Blue Rock is a lot more, it's tailored towards being more approachable, kind of more focused. It's less focused on the show and more focused on, plates of food that are interesting and they're thoughtful, but something where even if you hadn't ordered anything yourself, if it just showed up in front of you, you'd kind of understand, okay, this is what I'm about to eat. The goal here really being kind of, I want people to have, it's kind of not about them coming here and seeing, oh my God, look at what these guys are doing. It's more about people coming in and saying, I'm here to have a really great night, and I want to make sure that that's kind of more what I want us to focus on delivering versus a like come in for the show and the spectacle and all those things.
It's not dum da da dum. Ben Lou eat his food. It's more centered on the guest. It sounds like.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like, what do you feel like? What are you in the mood for? What do you want to try? Like, we're here to make sure that you have a good time.
And it sounds like you change the menu a lot, because if an animal comes in and eats all the ramps or whatever from your farm, then you don't have any ramps.
Yeah, exactly. So, with a lot of those tasting menu style restaurants, like it's very difficult to change the menus that frequently. And so a lot of times you can look at those menus kind of week to week, month to month, and you kind of see a lot of the same items. And because we do the options, it's easier for us to be really dynamic here.
You can change it up, and it's not a take it or leave it situation for your guests, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So what are some menu items now available at the restaurant at Blue Rock that you're psyched about? I mean, you're probably psyched about all of them, but pick a few.
Yeah, so one of the dishes that just went on, it was either last week or the week before. We're doing a tortellini. So it's filled with a smoked potato filling. So you take potatoes, smoke them for about an hour, a couple hours, and then they get cooked down, basically turned into a puree with a little bit of butter, some fresh vegetables, and we use that as a filling for tortellini. So you get this really delicious kind of really save like with the smoke. Or my experience, like with smoking potatoes, you kind of get almost like this hammy flavor. So you have
Hmm.
a vegetarian feeling that kind of feels really savory, really meaty. And then we actually, instead of cooking them in a sauce, we actually cook them in a broth that's a clarified consomme made from Parmesan cheese. So we actually make Parmesan stock and then we clarify the traditional way you would a consomme. So it comes out really beautiful and clear. It has all the fat is actually taken off of the stock, but it has like a really, really distinct and really powerful flavor of Parmesan. So it
So
kind
you
of
take like the Parmesan rinds and you simmer that for however long. How long does it take to make Parmesan stock?
it takes about an hour to make the stock, and then about probably another hour to make the consomme. We actually don't with the amount that we need. We started with rinds and we quickly ran out, so we're actually just microplaning Parmesan cheese now to make the stock.
Oh
But the
wow.
flavor is actually really great that way.
Yeah, so because obviously Parmesan cheese is full of amino acids, all that umami stuff, so that's all in the broth or the
Yeah,
concentrate. Could you clarify it?
yeah, exactly. So I love it because it's a dish that eats with kind of a lot of richness, a lot of umami, but not it doesn't depend on fat to do that. It doesn't depend on fat or protein.
So do you do anything with the leftover Parmesan cheese fat?
Yeah, actually, once when you make the stock, the liquid will separate.
Uh-huh.
So we'll actually lift off the fat. And then when we're picking up the tortellini and the consomme, we actually add just like a little bit of the fat back to it. And it kind of adds like this kind of extra dimension of that Parmesan flavor and that richness. That was um, something I think I'd heard about. I want to say it was Ducasse. It was either Ducasse or a Robuchon doing with their stocks. They would take some of like for the chicken stock, they would make it super super clear, but then they would add just a little touch of that chicken fat back to it.
Makes sense, but in a different way, so the fat is more impactful and you use less
Yeah,
of it.
yeah, it's a way you can like I think really finesse the flavors and textures together.
Yeah, I like to save fat from stock on the rare occasions when I make it at home and use it to cook potatoes or as the oil for rice pilaf or that kind of
Yeah,
thing.
yeah. No, it's delicious.
What else? What else is on your menu?
So right now, we're doing a really lovely cioppino dish, or sort of a cioppino dish. It's one of our main entrees. So cioppino is traditionally it's like a seafood soup or seafood stew, and for ours, we actually kind of turned that cioppino aspect is more of a sauce. So we have a piece of we were doing turbo kind of grill. We have a bichotan grill, which is like a really like a high powered Japanese charcoal grill. So we were cooking turbo on that. We're doing Alaskan halibut right now. Um, so the dish itself, kind of really simply grilled piece of Alaskan halibut, um, steamed, poached, and marinated Gulf shrimp, and then for the cioppino broth we have it's a lobster stock that kind of it's fortified twice actually. So we kind of make the lobster stock and then we fortify it like you would for like a jus. So fresh aromatics, more brandy, tomato paste. We do that once to bring it down, and then we actually do it a second time to kind of like further fortify and reduce the flavors. So you get this kind of really, really rich broth sort of sauce that kind of goes all over the plate. And so when you eat all of that together, you kind of get those flavors and aspects that you get in a cioppino. But then it's more geared as a main entree. It's more geared towards like a protein and sauce. And then like the vegetable they're using right now is French white asparagus, like the really thick stalks are kind of just starting to come in. Um, and so we do that kind of as the garnish for the plate.
Just kind of steamed, or what do you do with the white asparagus?
We do it in a baragul. So it's like an aromatic broth made from white wine, vegetable aromatics, spices, lemon zest, and then just lots and lots of olive oil. And then we just really gently poach the asparagus into that, so you kind of preserve that really kind of almost juicy texture that you get.
Mhm.
And then they're just infused with all those aromatics.
So when you're reinforcing the sauce, the broth, the sauce for the cioppino, does it help that you put herbs in the beginning and then you add them later on, so you have kind of a multiple flavor, sensory, herby experience?
So that's actually an interesting point. That's something I've been playing around with a lot, since I've been at Blue Rock. When you learn a lot of those, call them fundamentals, whatever, there's kind of a set recipe that you do, right? For your stocks, for traditional stocks, it's like, add in your mirepoix, add in like eight peppercorns, three parsley stems, stuff like that.
Mhm.
And I think, you get that stuff drilled into you so much that you don't really question it. And it's something I've been playing around a lot with here, in terms of like the timing of aromatics, right? Because kind of that's the exact point that you're making is, you add an herb at the beginning of a stock and you cook it for 8 hours. Well, like how much of those aromatics are really still there? Um, and I've actually found the same thing with vegetables as well. If you think about like if you're making a chicken soup, and you add in those vegetables and they just until they're cooked and you eat it, you get this really like, beautiful sweetness from, all your onions and turnips and carrots, what have you. But then when you add them from the very beginning, cooking for a few hours, it's a much different sort of flavor to it. And so one thing I've been playing around with a lot of stock sauces and all of it really is kind of figuring out, okay, do I want the vegetable aromatics to be fully cooked out and just kind of have that kind of base sort of caramel sweetness, or do I want more of that kind of top end sort of aromatic quality of, a leek and a turnip and things like that. So it really varies sauce to sauce as far as what we do. A lot of times for herbs, what I'll do is I'll actually take the stock or the sauce, finish it completely, um, turn off the heat, and then throw in all the herbs right at the end. So it kind of steeps almost like a tea. And then you get those like really kind of, you get a lot of freshness that way, I find.
And what kind of herbs do you typically use for sort of these European style dishes?
Yeah, it's really geared towards the final dish. So like for the cioppino, it's a lot of tarragon, a lot of chervil, sort of those anise flavors. Because I think that anise aromatic kind of works really well to kind of cut through the richness, and kind of works well with the flavor of lobster and shellfish, what have you. But then, other times it might be really thyme heavy, really parsley heavy. Sometimes there's just no aromatics at all. Really depends.
So it could be in the future that with some dishes, instead of like their mirepoix going in at the beginning, it could go in at the end. Maybe you would shave
No,
carrots on top or something like
no,
that.
that's exactly what I've done in a couple cases. So like we're doing a spätzle right now as one of our pasta courses, and that spätzle actually goes. The rest of the other predominant flavors are basically black pepper, spätzle, foie, and dill. And so it was actually kind of thinking of that sort of like matzo ball chicken soup sort of angle. And so when we're doing the stock for that sauce, it actually gets a bunch of ginger and green onion thrown in right at the very end. So you get a lot of those really bright, kind of like those really fresh elements that I think mix well with the pepper and the dill. Um, that kind of does a lot to kind of keep the dish light, even though it's made with chicken stock. There's some butter, and there's foie in the dish.
But you finish it with you said ginger and scallions, you said?
Yeah,
Onions?
the stock itself is finished with ginger and scallions. So it's kind
Yeah.
of like it's really interesting for me. It's a traditional spätzle dough, but we actually make it with masa flour. So it's
Hmm.
kind of like your like Chinese, Jewish, Mexican grandma making soup for you.
So it's corn spätzle with Chinese aromatics at the end.
Yes. Yep. And then there's like dill, and then it's kind of final flavor wise, it's kind of inspired. It's more thinking about matzo ball soup,
Uh-huh.
kind of for me with the dill and all the black pepper, the chicken.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah, no, I think it comes together really well. One of the last garnishes is actually crispy chicken skin, or it's two. We take chicken skin from making the stock and we fry it, so you get all this like really crisp bites from chicken skin, and then we actually make a foie torchon that we freeze and then grate over the whole thing, so it just kind of really melts in right before it goes to the table.
Ooh, that sounds delicious. And I love that approach that seems very uh toward the first quarter of the 21st century, where you use whatever flavor component, whatever ingredient you want, and you don't necessarily worry about its national heritage. So you got Mexican corn and Jewish matzo ball soup and Chinese aromatics, and it all tastes good together. So it doesn't even really matter what the origins are.
Right. I think it's kind of like, I think it just makes sense in this country. It's kind of thinking about that melting pot aspect, and kind of you start with one element, kind of extrapolate, okay, it can go to here, then it can go to there, then it can go to there. Kind of as long as nothing really clashes, then, maybe it can all work together.
Yeah, yeah, it's different from the fusion of the turn of the century when you got started, when sometimes it was great, but sometimes it was so self-conscious that
Right.
it didn't really go together.
Yeah, I think if you do it well, you can do it in a way where you don't need to advertise it, so to speak, where it's just you're kind of bringing together all those elements in kind of a more seamless way, where it's a dish that tastes good. It's not, oh, this is like Japanese French or something like that.
Right.
I kind of think almost if you have to point it out, then maybe it's not so seamless.
Right. And so, yeah, go back to the kitchen and practice some more.
Or
So,
just kind of figure out like where you can really like synthesize and like make everything work together.
right. So what are your plans for the rest of the year? What's coming up?
So this is our second full year in operation, which for any restaurant, like making it past your first year is huge. So for this year, it's really about figuring out, okay, we think we know where a groove is, and let's see if we can really make it happen here. You know what I mean? We got really great response for our guests in the first year, and so now it's, can we build on that? Can we keep it going? And can we really, I think, build momentum and have it roll? What I see a lot for restaurants is that it's such a huge thing getting past their first year, but it's really kind of year 2, 3, and 4 where you kind of, you figure out as an operator, okay, is this a sustainable thing? Can you make the business end really work to where you have a business that's going to go where you can actually feasibly look at year 5 through 10. You know what I mean? Whereas I think for a lot of people, it's if you get through your first year and you're like, okay, cool, I got it. Then year 2, 3, and 4 is where it's really like, okay, we're starting to hit some real growing pains, and like, oh my, what do we do, and how do we figure this out?
Yeah, I think if we learned anything in the past 3 years, it's that we don't got it. Like there's always stuff that we're gonna have to learn and deal with, and curveballs that are gonna be thrown at us.
Yeah, exactly. I think for any restaurant, small business, whatever, you have to, if you don't have that constant eye on growth, you know, and figuring out where you're going to find that growth consistently year over year, then, you're not, if you're not seeing that far ahead, then you're going to have a lot of difficulties kind of pop up at the last second, when really they're not really coming up at the last second. They're kind of things that have been developing over time.
When it seems like part of being a good chef is anticipating what could go wrong, because
Hmm.
something always goes wrong, and so figuring
Yeah,
out how to adjust to that is.
exactly. I mean, there's so much that can happen that's out of your hands, that you really have to make sure that you're always staying on top of the things you do have control over. You know.
Yeah, cool. And that is a very positive note on which to end our conversation, I think, because we're about out of time anyway. But it was really nice getting to know you, Bin Lu, and I hope we can do it again, maybe in real life sometime.
Yeah, no, this is great. I'd love to speak to you again. Hopefully, we can get you to come out here on the property. You can kind of see it. I can show you around.
That would be cool. In the meantime, good luck and keep on keeping on.
All right. Thanks so much, Brett. You too.